Good morning, everybody. I'm glad everybody could join us this morning for our next in a series of webinars. My name is Mike Howell, Senior Agronomist with Nutrien, joined here today with Dr. Drew Gholson with Mississippi State University Extension Service. And Drew is our irrigation specialist here in Mississippi. Drew, you've been here going on 2 years now.
I'm still claiming I'm new as long as I can, but a little less than 2 years. It'll be 2 years next spring. So this will be my second growing season here in Mississippi.
So been here 2 growing seasons and probably the 2 wettest years on record in the Mississippi Delta.
That's right. That's right. I get a lot of jokes about hiring irrigation specialists, and it's just done nothing but rain since then.
So we're joining you today from Stoneville, Mississippi, the Delta Research and Extension Center. And right down the road from this location, I'm told that y'all have just opened a water research facility, and it's kind of a joint venture. Tell us a little bit about that facility.
That's right. Yeah. So it's the full title, which is a mouthful. It's the National Center for Alluvial Aquifer Research, and it's a part of the Mississippi State University system and USDA ARS, and it's a joint venture with both of us going in together. And it is focused, as the simplest way to put it is focused on water research. Here specifically over the lower Mississippi River Basin, the alluvial aquifer, as it's in the title, focusing on really conservation practices, identifying different practices we can do within conservation, as well as production practices, and just anything we can do to increase water use efficiency, maintain or increase yields by using less water, and in addition, water quality as well. And so we're kind of attacking it from all different angles, different scientists with different expertise, all come together to try to come up with some practices. And then comes the fun part. My area is extending that out and adoption and promoting those as we come up with some good plans.
Well, that sounds great. Something we desperately needed. I started my professional career on that same farm. It was a research farm for a corporation at the time, and we thought the way to irrigate was to go out and turn the water on, and when the water ran out the other end, it was irrigated. And
that's right.
If that happened at 2 o'clock in the morning, it would get turned off sometime the next day when we got back to work. We weren't going back out at 2 o'clock to do that. But I understand you've got some great new technology you can talk to us about today. And it's getting close for this corn to start being harvested down here in the Mid-South. Saw some combines going down the road yesterday.
So
talk to us a little bit today about when we need to terminate this irrigation on corn and that kind of stuff. And while we're getting started, I want to remind everybody that feel free to ask questions. We have a couple of options on that. There's a Q&A button down at the bottom of the screen, and there's also a chat feature. So either one of those, just punch your questions in, and we'll answer as many of those questions live today as we can. So with that, I'm gonna step over here to the side, practice some social distancing, and let Dr. Drew take off.
I appreciate it. And before I get started, I want to thank Mike and Nutrien to inviting me to be a part of this webinar series. I've been enjoying watching them, and so I'm just happy to be a part of it. Happy to help, and like you said, I'm relatively new to the Mississippi Delta area, learning as much as I can as I go through, but we've made a lot of strides in technology as far as irrigation goes. And so there's a lot of those tools and technologies that we can use to make these decisions as we get towards not only termination in corn, but also throughout the season. And so I think whatever we can do to help from an extension standpoint, to help help knock down some of those barriers. And I think knowledge is one of them. Understanding how we can use those soil moisture sensors in this case, and then I'm going to go into looking at the corn. So here in Mississippi, we are, like you said, we're seeing some coming down the road, getting ready to harvest, and then a lot of what I've seen, we have a high range, as you would expect, with some planting going on, but around dent to halfway through to getting back to black layer, and so I think probably one of the happiest times I think some of the farmers are is when can we be done irrigating. I don't know if it's a task that many folks love to do. And so if we can mark that off our list and say we're done. I think that's a good thing for everybody to be able to not no longer get pivot stuck or pipes break or any of those things that go along with irrigation. But what we want to make sure that we're doing is cutting off that irrigation or feeling like we can terminate irrigation at the right time. Because that's twofold. We don't want to cut it off too early, and we don't want to send an excess water down and waste money that way as well. So there's the good news. A part of that, as far as the corn growth staging goes, is there's some pretty good easy ways to determine where we're at and help predict out when we're going to hit physiological maturity or black layer in our corn. And at that point, so I asked to be talked about corn irrigation termination, and the quick answer is at maturity or at black layer, and that's when we're done. But there's some advantages to help predicting that out past before that point comes, to help make better decisions. I think financial decisions that will help either increase your yield and not reduce yield, but also not send excess water or crank up that well. So on one end or the other, we may be losing money on that. And so making that important decision. And so what I'm going to do today is go through staging of corn, helping predict out from dent onto black layer, and show, and this may just kind of be going through several examples, but I think that serves to help folks to see different stages and go through different examples of what that may look like. And you can't see them here, but I've got a stack of on here on the table that we went and picked out and try to give you a decent range of stages. And then I've got some pictures. So this is, for me, I hope this is informal. Feel free to ask questions as we go, and I can field those as well. And I'm also going to be flipping, I probably maybe flip back and forth between some sharing my screen to show some pictures that maybe offer some better visuals that would help, that may be hard to see from the camera here. So just like I said, when we're trying to predict out from dent to black layer, there's some tools that we can use. And again, I'm going to go through some of those examples, but I've seen different numbers, and I'm more on the irrigation side, and I lean on here in Mississippi, our corn specialist, Dr. Larson, as well, to help me with some of these with this part of the predicting. But 75% of the kernel weight is filled out after dent. And so it is an important part to continue to make sure the moisture is adequate for that corn plant during that window from dent to black layer, and not have it being stressed out, and not fill those kernels weight and have it filled less than the potential it could be. And so, you could see 15 to 20% reduction in that filling of that weight if we stress that plant out during that time. And like I said, we don't want to waste money by sending unneeded irrigation down on the same side. And so as we start to get to dent, here's one I would assume that we're right at. So, we all can see that, the dent there. We start to see these dents, and I would say probably the biggest confusion when we talk about identifying dent and then going forward to track that milk line going down is identifying dent, because it's more of a process instead of a snap your finger and it's there. And so we start to see some dents, and it may take a little bit more time to actually start to see that starch build up. You can run your fingernail at the top end of that kernel and see if it's hard or soft, and you start to get a better idea of exactly where we're at. And so an example, if we're at dent and then they come back 5 or 6 days later and they don't see that starch line move down that kernel, they start to ask, why are we not seeing that? Well, maybe we weren't exactly at dent at that point. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through here. You really just kind of going back to the very specific basics is just grab a corn and just snap it open and get the bottom end or the top end, I guess, the point, and look down, and you can see where that, and this was what I would call maybe and this is, gets kind of confusing, or not every kernel is going to be exactly the same, but making your best guess. This one has starch layer started on the top. I want to put it a little bit close. I drew some black lines to kind of see. I don't know if you see that pretty well. Just kind of as you look through there, they're not all exactly going to be the same. If we could call that 25% milk line. And so as that starch builds up, you can see that that color difference as it goes down and makes its way through the kernel. So as it starts dent, going back to identifying dent, you have about 20 to 24 days, 21 to 24 days before it reaches black layer. And there's some other variables that may change that number as well. But here in Mississippi, it's hot, it's dry, and so we're at that stage right now of dent. And so you have to consider all those other considerations that may affect it, and also which we'll get into a little bit later, but soil moisture. So as we predict out, we'll kind of stay focused on predicting out. Here's that 25%. And so if you have 25% of 24 days, then that's going to be 18 days to maturity. So another way, so you got 24 days, or another way to maybe think about it is each quarter, as it progresses through each quarter, so we go 25, 50, and 75, that's about 5 to 6 days to make it to that next stage. And then once we get into 75% of the way down, and then we can predict out we're only about 5 or 6 days away from black layer. And I don't have here one to show you exactly, but as you can pull back layer, I don't know if you can see this, but get at the very tip, get your fingernail and move it, and then you can be able to see that black layer. And at that point, it's sealed off, and that crop or that corn was not going to take up any more water to help fill that kernel. And so any water, any excess irrigation or any irrigation on that plant would be in excess and unneeded, because it is going to be shut off, and no more fill is going to be happening on that crop. And so again, it's just weighing on both sides of those. We want to make sure that I'm not driving down the road and seeing somebody irrigate even at black layer, because that's a wasted irrigation, and we can get into economics about how much it costs to turn on that well and run that well, but you can save a lot of money by cutting out an irrigation that you may otherwise have used. And then I think I had another here as we looked. Here we go. This one's a little bit further along. You see the corn here, look down, and I think we're going to call that about 50%. I drew some black lines there. We can see that line 50% as we go through, and so then our best guess or estimate on that is 24 days, and so 50%, we have 12 days left to reach black layer. And so once we can establish that, I'm going to go through and again, just informal and share my screen, see if this works here. And then show you some little bit closer up pictures of what that may look like as we go through. So can you see that well? All right. So again, at dent stage, 75% of its way, we can see a 15 to 20% suffer from yield. And then here's a really good crisp picture of what that milk line goes down, and that starch working its way down, and then that difference in that color as we work through. And here's an example of actually this year. I pulled that. I pulled that on July 13th, and that's the picture from July 13th. And so at that point, my estimation was July. I called it 30%. So we've kind of put it anywhere between 16 and 17 days to maturity to black layer. And then so my date that I marked at that point was July 30th. And so we're coming, it's the 24th now. So we're getting close. We're getting in within a week at that point. And I was mentioning to you this earlier before we started is for me anyways, I don't feel comfortable making, so on July 13th, I wouldn't say we were done. I was hoping, based on the soil moisture readings that I had, I was kind of assuming, I think we're going to be done. But there's a lot of things that can happen. It's hot and dry, and we try to estimate what soil moisture is going to be in there. But as we get into that 5 to 6 day range is where I feel a lot more comfortable of making a call on when we can turn off that irrigation, because we have a lot better idea of what soil moisture is in there. And then as we go through, here's just another example. I told you I'm going to go through just to work all the ways through. Here's a full equation of what that looks like. Again, we can talk about 24 days, and then also a quarter of the way through, it's going to be about 5 to 6 days as it works its way through. And so in this picture, as we go through, it's 50% milk line. So we take our 24 days, we times it by 50%, and then we subtract that from 24, and we've got 12 days that we can predict out to where it no longer needs any excess water. And so in addition to that, here, and I told you I didn't have a picture of that black layer, but I just want to throw that up there to see, so that we can see what that looks like if you pulled your kernel back, peeled it back, and you could see that black layer being formed, and it's closed off, and any water from that point is going to be excess. What I had been focused on, probably this first half of this, or the first section of this, has been really identifying where we're at in the corn, from dent on to black layer, and then understanding by using where we're at here, and to predicting out. We also, what I use this slide for here is our water use in that corn plant. Again, we talked about most of its waste being filled out, but 25% less. So we could see a reduction in yield during that time, and trying to see how much soil moisture we have in that profile to see if it's going to last out until black layer. But water use from the corn plant at tassel, or in between tassel and milk, is not equal to water use from that plant from dent into maturity. And so we need to keep that in mind as well. And so as we look at and try to assess our soil moisture, that crop is not using near as much water as it was. It's not needing as much water as it matures up, and its maturity level is higher on than where it was, and putting so much energy into tasseling and the reproductive stage. As we start to get down to dent, its needs are a lot less. And so we're trying to, like I said, it's a pretty simple thing to say, well, termination's black layer, but there's a lot of other scenarios or situations that we want to wade in there to make the most accurate decision as we go through. And this just is another example to show you a real example. That's a bar graph as it goes through, and as this is a volumetric soil moisture sensor, so we can see the soil moisture content, and you can look, we've got it labeled. This is from Dr. Larson again. As it went from tassel, you can see how steep that line is of that water use. As that's going down, that plant's using that water in that soil, and it's pretty steep as it's going down. And when it's been recharged up, that's going to be irrigation, and it comes back up to our recharge side. And then it's a little more slanted, a little less use. And then we had either a rainfall or an irrigation at that point. And then we start to see it step down again. But once we hit dent, and then even maybe more so, about 25% of the way through milk line, it starts to flatten out a little bit more. So we're using less water during that time. And so all that needs to be into consideration as we predict out how much moisture do we need in our profile to make sure we get to black layer.
So Drew, you've mentioned that a couple of times, the moisture in the profile.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about how you figure that out. You go out there and dig a hole and see how wet the dirt is? I know there's some new technology.
There is. And so, we spent all this time talking about where we're at and how we need to predict out. And we keep saying in relation to soil moisture, in relation to soil moisture. And so, within the last few years, really, we've had a lot of new technology that helps us make better decisions on what that soil moisture is. And so as we go through there, utilizing soil moisture sensors, then we can take those and predict out a lot easier on what's going to be happening. So you can see my screen here. And so we have soil moisture sensors. There's a lot of reasons for using soil moisture sensors. Obviously, what we're talking about here is termination and predicting out on the back end of irrigation. We can use soil moisture sensors to see how long we can hold off from soil moisture, how long we can hold off before that initial irrigation. And that can a lot of times save us in irrigation as well. If we don't need to put water on that plant too early, if it's not needed. Again, I've been hired here for 2 years. It's been really wet. We've caught a lot of rain in that spring. And so if we can hold off a few days because it really doesn't need it during that time, and we catch a rain, we just saved an irrigation.
Well, and another thing on that is I work for a fertility company, and we're
That's
selling
right.
nutrients, and nitrogen doesn't necessarily mix with water that well. And if we can save that irrigation up front, we may allow that nitrogen to get into the plant a little better.
That's a good point. There's lots of reasons for soil moisture sensors, and we talk about termination, we talk about initiation, and to me, nutrient management and irrigation can really go together because we want, from my standpoint, the irrigation specialist, I want that water to go to that root zone. I don't want it to shoot off the top and then run off, and I don't want it to go too deep. If we put too much water in and the soil is saturated and we push that water down and it's not needed, I mean, it's wasted water and wasted money. We also don't want to waste our nutrients and push it through leaching. And at the same time, from an environmental standpoint, the same reasons that we have, we want to focus in on that root zone from a nutrient and irrigation. We also don't want that water running off because of the nutrients from a runoff and deep percolation or leaching. And so management from irrigation standpoint, good management from an irrigation standpoint, it goes hand in hand with nutrient management as well, and really not wasting our money and literally sending it away from the plant by using that. So all these are the kind of going through a real quick spiel of soil moisture sensors. They're not just to trigger irrigation. They're also to see how much is that irrigation going in. When we do irrigate, is it getting down into our soil profile? Is it getting to our roots? Or do we have some kind of hard pan or seal on top of the surface where it's just going out the tail ditch and running off because we're not actually getting it into the profile? And it can send a big red flag and alert that we may be not getting our water down into our root zone.
So Drew, you've mentioned the water sensors, and I had never heard of them, haven't seen them until yesterday when we visited your plots, but I know they're widely used now in Mississippi. I understand that Mississippi is one of the leading states as far as the water sensor use. And
yeah, we're real proud of that, and again, I've been here a short amount of time, so there's only probably a little bit of credit, maybe if any, for me to be able to claim some of that. But if you look at the results from the irrigation survey and ag census, then Mississippi is right there with about 27, about a third of folks, along with Nebraska, at the top of when you look at the nation on soil moisture adoption. And so, I mean, what you're seeing is folks seeing the value in that. And literally the value in that. If we know what's going on under the ground and seeing, you can start to save a lot of money. And those sensors typically all pay for themselves when you start using that.
Well, I know Mississippi State has been working for several years now with the riser program and irrigation technology. And you have a website that folks can look at.
We do. And I actually have a link on that. And it's kind of going back to our water center website. It's NCAR, so National Center for Alluvial Aquifer, but it's ncaar.msstate.edu. And so we have some of our programs, like you mentioned, riser. We do a lot of these technologies on farm. We get them out there and let farmers try and use them. let them see the value and understanding what's going on. And that's what we see where the adoption goes. I think it's just a lot of trying these soil moisture sensors. Yeah, and I will have a link. I think one of my last slides on here
Okay, perfect.
goes through there. So this is a soil moisture reading, and so we can go. I can sit here and we can talk soil moisture sensors all day, because there's so many different types, different ways to read them, and different readings based off those soil moisture sensors. But honing in on to what our focus is today, being predicting out and termination and corn irrigation termination. Go back to that picture that I mentioned earlier here, and this is, I try to take a real scenario of what's going on, and this is what's taken to July 13th. Our prediction was July 30th, and we're coming into that date of July 30th. Like I said, we're about 6 days out. So this is the soil moisture readings that I took this morning from that field, from that picture that I just showed you, where we predicted out July 30th. And so you use soil moisture sensors, and what do they mean? And that's what I mean. We could sit here all day and kind of talk about what they mean. And so we try to put a lot of resources out there to help interpret these numbers. So these are watermark in this specific example. These are watermark or granular matrix. So we're looking at cinnabar reading. So actually, the higher the number, from 0 to 200 or so, is going to be, as the higher the number goes, the drier the soil moisture is going to be. So we have soil moisture sensors at 6, 12, 24, and 36. And so you can see down even at 36, it's starting to dry out, which tells me the crop is using that water down at 36. And so kind of circling back, once we identify what stage we're at, and then the next step is to understand what soil moisture content we have. It's hard later in the season when it's this mature, because we have soil moisture down at 36, and that's hard to gauge how much moisture we have that deep by filling the soil, using a shovel to and kind of kick the dirt and see. There's a big difference in what's at the top versus at the bottom.
Right. Well, Drew, we do have a question
Sure,
that just popped in, and it's kind of right on time with this, kind of a real life situation here. Wants to know if the soil is at 50% depletion in a 24-inch sample. The plants are 12 days from black layer, and there's no rainfall expected for the next 10 days. Would you apply irrigation to refill the soil to field capacity, or would you just apply less water?
Okay, so to restate the question, he's at 50% depletion right now, which is his normal. I would say that maybe his normal irrigation trigger. And how long are we out? 10 days?
12 days to black layer, no rainfall for 10 days.
No rainfall for 10 days. Man, this is where it gets, tricky. And so if we're at your point of where you want to trigger your irrigation, where based on what your soil moisture readings are showing that it's time to irrigate, and we're still 10 days out, dependent, I'd also kind of weigh in what type of irrigation, if it's pivot irrigation versus furrow irrigation, because you're able to put out a little bit more detail, I guess, in irrigation, and control how much you put out in a pivot. At that stage, he said, and this is where you start crossing, splitting hairs, I guess. But I would probably lean towards irrigating on that point, just to push it through, and then you're done. You're 10 days out. But I will say that we have seen scenarios where because you're at your point right now. And so I would go ahead and irrigate, and you're 10 days out. If that's his area where he's triggering his soil moisture or his irrigation. So those are good questions. Those are the hard questions we get as you try to get closer and closer and closer out. But I would, if you hit your trigger and you're still 10 days out, I would go. And kind of relaying off that question, another scenario I see quite a bit is we're almost to our trigger point, whatever we're setting that to be. And here in Mississippi, we have, using from watermarks. We have some cinnabar readings that we've shown across where we can set our thresholds are, and then we can do soil, percentages of soil moisture in the profile. But just to kind of what we've seen here in Mississippi, if we're about 5 to 6 days out, or we're maybe 7 days out, and we're not quite there to where we call our threshold. And we've done it where we've said, all right, go ahead and irrigate this side, but let's not irrigate this side just to see if there's any differences. And talking to, again, Dr. Larson, we have not seen any differences in yield based off the one where we went ahead and triggered and we irrigated and we didn't. But the difference in that is we weren't there yet. It was a close race as you talk about maturity and where we're getting close to that threshold. And that's a few times that we've done that, it's shown to go ahead and hold off, and there was no difference in that. So I hope that helps the question.
And another factor we have to look at, especially down here in the Southeast, is we've got 2 possibilities of hurricanes coming in the next 10 days as well.
Exactly. That's a very, very good point. It's, we can look at maturity stage, and we can look at soil moisture in our current time. We also need to look at what might be coming. And if you have a decent chance of rain, then that may just completely close you out, and that'd be enough in it. So here's kind of an example going off of what that looks like. Again, that's today. I've set my threshold line just to show a visual of what a threshold may look like, and we've predicted out that we're where we want to be the day before where we're predicting it out. And so I feel pretty comfortable. We're 5 to 6 days out. This is that window that I feel more comfortable of predicting a termination is that 7 to 5, 5 to 7 days, and having a better idea of what that looks like in the soil moisture. And so I would go ahead and say we're done there. It gets some of those as they get closer and closer and closer. It gets a harder situation to make those decisions. But like I said, we have seen where we're not quite there, but we're getting up there past our threshold, or close to our threshold, and we were 5 to 6 days out, and we held off, and then also watered one, and we have not seen the difference in those yields. As I go through just a little bit more details, I'm kind of hanging on the soil moisture sensors. So those are the 2 things we need to see and be able to understand to get to that point of termination of irrigation. And again, just kind of repeating it, but staging our corn, predicting out, and then identifying what our moisture looks like. And just kind of a keynote I want to, or a big point on that is our deep soil moisture sensors. Some things that we're not getting by just visual, or even sticking a probe in there, because most folks want to stick a probe in and just to compare and justify their soil moisture sensors, which I do too. But it's hard to get down that deep where these mature plants are utilizing water.
I think that kind of leads into this next question here. Assuming that you're going to irrigate the situation we just talked about, the 50%, and you've talked about how deep that water needs to go, how deep the roots are pulling it from. So assume it's 50% at 24 inches, and they decide to irrigate. What resources, what other information do they have available to see how quickly that irrigation water is going to reach that depth so the roots can pick it up?
Well, so we will have roots throughout the depth, throughout the depth of the root zone. And so at that point, you may not make it. I mean, it just all depends on the soil type. I mean, that's the biggest thing to that answer is what's the soil type and how easy it is for that to get down to that depth. But we can still have water uptake on the shallower portions of that root zone. And so that's important to note as well. I'm almost more treating those deep root zones as our bank of making sure there might be some down there it's still being able to use, that if we show it's dry up at the top, that there's still sufficient water that plant's utilizing at that depth, instead of looking, we need to get it down to that depth, if that makes
right.
any sense. It's just making sure we utilize and know that even the depths of the soil roots, the depths of the roots in the soil are going to make it's going to depend. Sometimes we don't see it go down that deep because of a hard pan or whatever reasons that may have restricted those roots to get down to that deep. But again, going back to our soil moisture sensors, utilizing and seeing, we can see root activity a lot of times because we're seeing that water movement down that deep, and we can assume we have water being pulled by those roots at that deep. So that assures us that we have some roots down at that depth. Hope I'm not sounding more of a it depends like on every one of my questions, but a lot of these it depends.
Well, there's so many variables.
There's a lot of
on all this
variables,
stuff, so.
and the biggest thing with soil moisture sensors is getting them on your farm, using them, and because it all goes back to what, just like your soil type, your crop, how long it takes you to get around. It's really getting comfortable with them on your place. And that's the biggest thing I've seen with folks is we try to get those barriers down to understand how to read some and help, but it's all about using them on your farm. Here's just a good example of that picture that I showed you with the root zone. And so that red box there is our target zone for irrigation. And, and that's where we don't want to push off our nutrients as well and lose them. And if we can save water, here's some just quick and broad numbers that my economist here at Mississippi State probably twitch because I ask him to try to help me with these numbers, and it depends is a big comment that he made to me. We got to just kind of putting my caveat on this. It all depends on the depth of how much we're pulling it from, type of irrigation, and type of fuel, and all those other things. But if we can just in general to help make some of these set home, as far as irrigation goes, we can save $7 to $10 per acre, around $7 per acre for sprinkler. If we can hold off on that last side other than we were going to, that multiplies pretty quickly, and we can see those savings, and those sensors are typically going to pay for themselves by utilizing that. Is there any other questions? I'm going to start as we can get close to wrapping up. This is our website that I showed you, and it's a long URL. This goes directly to our showcase, our soil moisture sensor showcase. And so when we talk about soil moisture sensors, and I kind of touched a little bit on the, kind of stayed on the surface of our soil moisture sensors and utilizing it for termination. But there's several different types of sensors, and they're going to give us different types of readings, a different number system. One's going to go down when it gets wetter. One's going to go up when it gets wetter, just based on the different types of sensors that we have. Another common question I get from growers and consultants is, so we got our two different types of sensors, but what also telemetry services do we have? What kind of, they're going to display those numbers different. I mean, it's going to be the same number, but there's different tools we can see to make it, assist us in interpreting those numbers. And there's a lot of different companies on the market right now that's helping us with those. And so what we try to do with this link here is to give growers the opportunity to try out different sensor companies and see what that feel is, and what those platforms are, whatever interfaces as it looks on their screen. And so if you click on that, and you get some background on different types of sensors, but also our companies. And so we have username and passwords given out there, so you can, without having to purchase anything, you can log in and just get a feel for which kind you may like. So I hope this is a good service.
And we can send this out when we put the video up. We'll get this email website out there for everybody to look at. So yeah. Do you still do grower visits and let growers come and look and see what this is out in the field there? I'm assuming it's one-on-one now. That's right. And so that's there's many disappointing things with COVID going on, obviously, but as far as directly to that site as well, that was our idea, is to make it an opportunity to log in and get a feel for what those platforms or interfaces are and the differences in them. I mean, some of them just show the numbers, and some of them assist you and make nice graphs and predict out what those some of the pictures that I showed you there. And then in addition to that, we wanted to have a field day where we had the companies come out and talk through and talk about because there's also the hardware component. What does it look like in the field? Because that's a big question. What is it going to get in my way when I run different tractors through with different implements on the back, and what type of year can we put it in, or what time of year can we install those? And then, because some of them are bigger than others and things like that. So we wanted to physically see the hardware, and then also go through and then the website side of the software side of that. And so that's a long answer to, unfortunately, we can't have the field day that we wanted to. So I appreciate opportunities to be able to send folks to this side of things. But no, if we have some questions, one-on-one questions, and we're able to take them out, then that's something we can do. But as far as the group, that we had to hold off. So maybe next year on that. Understand. So And for those of you that may be a little far away from Stoneville, Mississippi, we are going to be in the field this afternoon, weather permitting. I'm seeing some clouds pop up out there, but weather permitting, we're going to be shooting some video out in the field
Yes.
this afternoon, looking at that in a lot more detail, and we're going to post that on our economics website here in a few days. So
Yes.
be on the lookout for that. A lot more information to come on that.
I'm excited about that, and hopefully, I mean, these telemetry services, and we're going to focus a little bit more on soil moisture sensors this afternoon, really applies across the board. I mean, across the nation, not just here in Mississippi, but utilizing those soil moisture sensors. And it's a great tool. And hopefully today, talking about staging our corn, and then that other half of it, understanding what our soil moisture is, helps us make the best decision for our irrigation of our corn.
So we're getting close on time here. I don't see any more questions popping up yet, so we'll try to keep it going for a few more minutes if there is somebody trying to get another question in. But I know Mississippi is one of the leading states. What if that grower's sitting there thinking about, well, maybe I should do this next year? Give us just your spiel to get it over the fence. Help that grower make that decision. How is it going to make him money in the end?
Yeah. So I mean, we're talking about the back end and the front end. If we can knock out an irrigation, and you can kind of look at, again, if we're talking to somebody a different part, their irrigation costs may be a little bit different, and you can probably go to Extension website and look at irrigation costs and start to figure what that looks like out if we can hold back on some water going in, because it adds up pretty quickly. And I may be talking just to a biased crowd, but I have not come across someone that's decided to take the plunge and use soil moisture sensor that didn't say this was wonderful money spent on those, being able to do that. So everyone has some positive and been positive with their decisions they made to adopt those, and trying to take those plunge. I kind of go back to that same statement. Is there's anything we can do from that website or your current extension program and within your state to help localize some of those make those decisions that we need to make during that process? But and there's some helpful things with that, but just getting them and trusting them. So there's kind of the way we attack, or the way I work with growers is we need to trust the sensors, learn to trust the sensors, and learn to trust your knowledge that you're building within using those sensors. And so that's a process, because I think a lot of times we start out not trusting the sensors. Then we can go through a few irrigations and kind of see what that looks like. Okay, maybe we could have held off here, and can maybe even compare on their ground on their farm. And then the next step to me is trusting what they know from those sensors, because then it really goes into on their farm, on their field, and how their well, how much they can put out, what in their soil, and how it reacts to it. And then once they get to that point, I mean, they know more about what those sensor readings and when they need to irrigate from those sensor readings than I do by just going out and looking at some numbers. And so just hopefully that encourages to take those plunge and just learn with them. And there's a lot of resources out there to help that.
Okay, one more question just popped in. So let's see what this is. Have you ever done any research that you evaluated the effect on different irrigation termination dates on yield? If yes, was there any differences?
I will say personally, I have not done termination dates on that. There's been some a little bit on farm working with farmers, and like I mentioned, a little more relaxed or informal ways to kind of evaluate some of those decisions. So what we do know is, it's still using water. It's still, we kind of predict, I guess the way to answer that is the data that I'm using is when do we know that the plant no longer needs that water, and then we can predict out from that point and using that data. But as far as cutting them off and comparing that, I have not personally done that, besides what we talked about. As we get to that close, which we could go either way on terminating, and when we've left it and not irrigated it, and we irrigated the other side, when we compared those, we have not seen a yield. There was no difference in that, and so they cut the same. each one of those. And that was real informal. So, you know, you get kind of uncomfortable saying some of those things,
Right.
but to just what we've seen, it has made a difference. But that's when we get to that fine line of cutting it close. I haven't, you know, started then just completely dried it out from that point. But, you know, maybe as we get more comfortable soil moisture sensors and know what's actually down there and to be able to do that, maybe that's an opportunity we can fine tune. You know, economically, when does it maybe make sense to hold off and when we could cut it off? So it's a good.
Exactly. So we're still just scratching the surface with this technology and a lot more to learn about it. So.
That's right. That's right.
Well, Drew, that's all the questions we have. I really appreciate you taking your time today and going through this with us. I think it's been really informative.
Appreciate you having me.
Appreciate all of our participants joining us today, and stay tuned. We'll have some more coming out later in the year. So
great. Thank you for having me.